Hey viewers, my name's Cara. We're back in the office because I am doing another video that requires the use of the computer. I have some notes up on the screen here and photos that I'm going to share. This video is going to be about memorials dedicated to the victims of various witch trials. This came up because, I don't know if you've noticed, but where I hang out on the internet and social media, I started noticing over the past few weeks, people have been saying things like, oh my gosh, there's finally a memorial in Salem for the Salem witch trials. And my thought was, what are people talking about? Because there have been memorials to the Salem witch trials since the 1990s. Then last week, a friend of mine sent me an article entitled, "The Site of the Salem Witch Trial Hangings Finally Has a Memorial." And I realized that this wording probably comes from the headline of this article. It's an article from smithsonianmagazine.com, and it's actually from July of 2017, but obviously some people are just now seeing it. It's making the rounds right now. So this article is talking about a new memorial in Salem, Massachusetts that is located at the site of the hangings. So as the headline says, the site of the Salem witch trial hangings finally has a memorial. But this is not the first memorial that was in Salem. This memorial, which looks like a sort of semicircle of stones at the base of the hill, has stones with the names of the victims throughout it, just as the other Salem witch trials memorial does. But this one is at the actual site of the hill at the top of which the hanging tree would have stood. But there is also a Salem witch trials memorial, which is near the old burying ground graveyard cemetery location in Salem, and that one was dedicated in August of 1992. It was put together by the Salem Award Foundation. It's called the Salem Witch Trials Memorial, and it is adjacent to the old burying ground, a cemetery in town where one of the judges and some other notables are interred, according to the Smithsonian Magazine article about the new memorial. The Salem Witch Trials Memorial, some people have described it as it looks like a park. It's a series of benches, and this is not the best photo of it out there, but I decided for the ease of citing my sources that I would include the photos that are on the websites that I'm also going to be citing. I will be putting them together in a blog post that I can link to in the description of this video. So this isn't the best picture, but kind of, you can see along the edges, it's stone walls around this area, and then there are stone benches jutting out from the stone wall, and each of those benches has the name of one of the victims of the Salem witch trials engraved on it, along with the date and how they were executed. Most of them were hanged. One of them was pressed to death. And the website that this photo is from, salemweb.com, also has close-up pictures of each of the stones with that information. With many of these websites and articles, you will see people noting, if you visit, please be respectful of the residents. And I do want to emphasize that as well, because these are places where people still live to this day. And so if you're going there as a visitor, as a guest, as a tourist, please be respectful of that, because like the Smithsonian Magazine article mentions that some of the people they interviewed for it were talking about how they like living in Salem, but around Halloween when the tourists come, it can get kind of wild because all of a sudden people will be traipsing through their backyard and trying to raise the dead. So please be respectful. These are still places where people actually live. At the Old Burial Hill Cemetery in Marblehead, Massachusetts, which you may recognize from the film Hocus Pocus, there is also a memorial stone dedicated to Wilmot Red, who was the only victim of the Salem witchcraft trials from Marblehead. So there is a stone there because he was from there. This is just a typical sort of, it looks like a grave marker even. It just says, "In memory of Wilmot Red of Marblehead, innocent victim of the Salem witchcraft trials, hung on September 22nd, 1692. And in Danvers, Massachusetts, what is now known as Danvers, used to be called Salem Village, and that's actually where the Salem witch trials hysteria began. That's where the first accusations took place. And there you will find a memorial known as the Salem Village Witchcraft Victims Memorial. That one was dedicated in May of 1992. The Danvers Memorial is in a few parts. It's this big, it looks like a stone block of an altar, sort of. And on the front it says, "In memory of those innocents who died during the Salem Village Witchcraft Hysteria of 1692. Up on the top of it, there's a little, like a stone book podium and a book on the top. It looks like an open book. And you can't see it in this picture, but I've seen it in other photos. On the top of that book, it's actually carved to say the Book of Life, and there are symbols all around the podium that the book is sitting on. And then in the back here, this sort of back wall, it's in multiple parts, and there are quotes of what some of the Salem witch trials victims said during their examinations, carved into this back wall. So you get to read some of their actual words, and then the names of who said them are there as well. So the one in Danvers, as well as the one right in what is now known as Salem, the Salem Witch Trials Memorial, those were both dedicated in 1992. The site that I got this photo of the Danvers Memorial from is actually a blog from someone who traveled there, and they also mentioned that when they visited the Rebecca Nurse homestead, in the family burial ground there, which I was not able to find a photo of, they mentioned that there's also a memorial stone there to Rebecca Nurse specifically. Again, so an individual that was a victim of the witch trials, there is a memorial to them in the place where they were from. And then the blog mentioned that there's also a second statue there honoring the witch trial victims as a whole. So again, I wasn't able to find a photograph of that, but apparently there is also a memorial dedicated to all of the witchcraft victims at the Rebecca Nurse homestead. And I also wasn't able to find when those were put there. But the other two being dedicated in 1992, you can see why I've been a little bit confused about people saying, oh my gosh, there's finally a memorial in Salem, because there have been memorials in Salem since the 90s. But I have since learned from this article in 2017, this one is newer. It is a few years old now. It was dedicated in 2017, but I also had not actually heard of this one until now. So clearly this article is making its way around. People are maybe just seeing the headline that says there's finally a memorial, and although it does say the site of the witch trial hangings finally has a memorial, people may not realize that they're being very specific there. They are saying that this specific site has a memorial and it didn't before. But Salem has had memorials for quite some time, as have Danvers and Marblehead. And I found a lot of other information while looking up these memorials that is about other witch trials, but they don't have memorials connected to them that I could find. So I'm actually probably going to do another video talking about other trials and things that I've learned. But as far as memorials go, when I was talking to my friend about this and oh, now I understand why people are saying this. This must be the article that this wording of finally is coming from. We started talking about how the witch trials in the United States are obviously considered a very big deal in the United States because they happen here, but that they are really a drop in the bucket compared to all of the rest of the witch trials that happened throughout Europe. So my friend asked me, well, are there memorials in Europe? And I was pretty sure the answer was yes, although I didn't have any specifics. So I went to the trusty internet and I learned more about witch trials memorials around Europe. So the first thing that I found is actually a really great article that I highly recommend you read, and it's going to be linked in the list of resources that I'm going to attach into the description of this video, but it's called In Memory of the Witches. It's by Equal Times, and this article really got me started because it named several other things, it mentioned a couple other memorials, and it got me started searching. I literally just searched Witch Trials Memorials Europe, and that's how I found this one, and then, yeah, it helped me go from there. So the first witch trial memorial in Europe that I actually came across is one in the Norwegian Arctic. It's in Vardø. It's known as the Stilnisse Memorial. I looked up the pronunciation. I hope I got it even remotely close, but it is a two-part memorial. I have a photo here that kind of shows both pieces. One piece is an installation with mirrors above, you can see, and it's actually a flaming chair. This is a pretty incredible, visceral image of the witch trials, in my opinion. And then that piece, that long bit behind, is like a long hallway with 91 windows cut out of it. And there's information next to each window about each of the 91 victims of the witch trials that took place in this area. And this memorial is built on the site that those executions took place. This first article that I read also mentioned that there are museums of witchcraft in a couple other places, not necessarily freestanding memorials, but it mentions the Anna Goldi Museum in Switzerland, again pronunciation, I apologize, and the Museo de las Brujas in Navarro, Spain. And Not from the same article, but later on I also learned there is an Italian museum of witchcraft, the Museo Etnografica e della Stregoneria di Triora, and that is in Triora, Italy. Since I also happen to work at a witchcraft museum, the Buckland Museum of Witchcraft and Magic in Cleveland, Ohio, I find learning about other witchcraft museums very interesting as well. And of course, there are others. There is the Witchcraft Museum in Boscastle, which we are most closely connected to at the Buckland Museum because that one was started by Cecil Williamson and Gerald Gardner. But these other three, Switzerland, Spain, and Italy, are the three that I so far had come across when trying to look up memorials. The next memorial I found actually because of an article that was just about 6 lesser-known witch trials, and I found other articles like this, 10 witch trials you didn't know about, and so on. So this first one that I found mentions a memorial stone in Sweden that is dedicated to the victims of one of the biggest mass executions, where 71 people were executed on the same day. And I had never heard of this one before. So then when I looked up Witch Trials Memorial Sweden, I discovered the Wikipedia page for it. This is the Torskyrka Witch Trials in Sweden. So this memorial looks like it's out in the middle of the woods. It's 2 very large stones with names probably of victims or some kind of dedication engraved upon them. There's not a whole lot else clearly visible in this picture. It looks like there might be a plaque off to the side as well. And the Wikipedia page says that the memorial stone was placed in 1975, so it actually was placed before the ones in Salem. And that article, the first one I read, In Memory of the Witches, had mentioned that some of the first memorials to witch trials were in the United States and in Cologne, Germany. So we know about the ones in the United States. It was probably, I think, referring to Salem. So I looked up Cologne, Germany, and I did not find a specific memorial information or a photo about it, but I did find one that was established in 2008 in Fulda, Germany. This one looks like sort of a stone monolith and a little plaque in the ground next to it explaining who it is dedicated to, the victims of the witch trials in that area. And then later on, when I was just looking at the general witch hunt Wikipedia page, that page actually includes a photo and a little information about another German witch trials memorial that I wasn't able to find through any other search that I did. So I'm glad I ended up also looking at just the witch hunt page, because then I found this monument for the victims of the witch hunts of 16th and 17th century Brno, Germany. It was made by Annelie Grund, and it was installed or dedicated in 2005. It's sort of, it looks like a wooden post, and it has the names engraved along the side, and there are these sort of shattered glass-looking pieces sticking in at the top, or sticking out from the top. And this artist, Annelie Grund, does a lot of work with glass, which I learned from reading the Wikipedia page about them. Then what I did for my search was, again, I just looked up Witch Trials Memorials Europe. I kept going back to that. I tried specific countries, Witch Trials Memorials Germany, and so on. And I went to the image search and I just started looking for images that I hadn't seen yet. So that's actually how I found these next two, because I saw pictures that I hadn't already seen. So this one is actually a plaque on a wall of a castle in England. This one is dedicated to the victims of the Bideford witch trial. And the executions took place in this Exeter castle, Rogemont or Rogemont. I'm not sure if the G is pronounced hard or soft, but it is inscribed to the Devon witches in their memory. It has their names listed and their dates of death. And the Wikipedia page where this photo is housed also mentioned that Burton at Bideford, a museum in Bideford, has a permanent display related to the Bideford witch trials as well. And the next one is from Essex. This is dedicated to the Essex Witch Hunt victims. It's the Essex Witch Hunt Victims Memorial, and I actually know someone, one of my viewers and patrons, who let me know when I mentioned that I was doing this research and I had talked about finding a couple of these memorials in my Patreon Lens story. They let me know that they actually know someone who was part of the campaign to get this memorial installed. And they also let me know that they have remembrance services there at Salem, which is pretty cool because that is not information that I came across on the internet in my search. So this is at Colchester Castle, where the accused were imprisoned to await trial. And this is in the grass, sort of facing the castle near some benches, is what I gathered from reading the description about it online. This one is also just a little marble stone sort of laying almost flat against the ground. And in this photo, it's got autumn leaves scattered all around it, and it's just rained recently, which shouldn't be surprising because this is England, but the stone is sort of wet in most places in this photo, and just the edges of it are starting to dry. And there are some carvings of plants. There's like a tree and like a conifer leaf, it looks like. And it says, "In memory of the victims of the Essex witch hunts who were imprisoned in Colchester Castle, in the 16th and 17th centuries, over 200 women and men were held in the cells of Colchester Castle on charges of witchcraft. Many died while awaiting their trial. Much of the evidence was based on superstition, ignorance, and hysteria. This plaque is placed as a memorial to them all and in the hope of an end to persecution and intolerance." Now, Scotland, although Scotland had quite a large death toll for their witch trials, not the largest, but in the thousands, I read that Scotland doesn't have very many memorials to its witch trials victims because the government didn't want to pay for them. People who had been interviewed who had tried to write to the government to install memorials, and the government didn't want to do that because they have a policy of not paying for memorials. So any memorials that do exist there must have been privately funded or just put up some way, somehow, right? So this one that I found is called Maggie Wall's Memorial. It's in Dunning, Scotland. And this one is interesting because if you read the page about it, and again, you will get all of the links so you can read all of this stuff yourself if you would like. This one's really interesting because they're saying that there is no record of anyone named Maggie Wall, but it is near a location known as Maggie Wall's Woods. And so some people theorize that this is a memorial that was put up by some people to represent all of Scotland's accused and executed witches, and they just named it Maggie Wall after the woods that are nearby, even though Maggie Wall was not an individual, factual, historical person. It is a representation. So I like that idea. You know, to me, it doesn't have to be for a specific real person. It is in honor of many real people. So it looks like a large cairn of stones stacked up, and there's a pillar of stone on top, which is topped with a cross, and the stones are painted on with dates and the name, Maggie Wall, things like that. And there's sort of a fence around three sides of it, and there are stone steps leading up to it. So it's actually on like a higher platform of sorts. It's a little grassy hill, but there are steps going up to it, and then the thing itself is all made of stone. There are toys and things like that stuck between the stones, which some people have theorized about, like, what does that mean? And another interesting thing that I read is that nobody knows who put this memorial up, and the paint gets refreshed every now and again to keep it nice and bright and clear and easy to read, but no one knows who is repainting it. So I find that all very interesting, that just someone decided to make this happen, and they are making sure that it is kept up because it was clearly something they felt strongly about. And I can imagine if Scotland doesn't have any official memorials for their witch trials, that something like this could have a really significant meaning to people who want that memorialized. So this is just one that I was able to find in Scotland. I'm sure there are more, although I didn't find them because the article that I read that said the government doesn't pay for them said that any memorials that there are tend to be not very well known and somewhat historically inappropriate. And I don't know if that means, like this one, how Maggie Wall was not necessarily a real person, or if they mean in some other way that, like, whatever somebody did for the memorial is not actually very respectful to the victims. I'm not sure. The next thing I found was that Italian Witchcraft Museum in Triora, which I already mentioned, so I don't want to go too much into detail with that because it's not a memorial per se, but it is a museum where they memorialize the goings-on and talk about them and educate them, just like those other museums I mentioned. But there are a couple other statues that I want to mention real quick, because I don't know, this might depend on what we define as a memorial, but I came across a couple statues that are dedicated to the victims of witch trials. So there is one in the United States in Virginia. There is a statue of a witch known as Grace Sherwood. And the statue is of a woman. She is kind of holding, looks like a bundle of cloth, which might have plants in it. Maybe she's gone to find healing herbs. She's holding a stick, maybe what looks like a wand, and there's a little raccoon kind of tugging at her skirts. And then there's also a stone that looks very much just like a gravestone. It's just a simple like marble stone that says, "In memory of Grace White Sherwood," and then the dates. And it describes her as a healer of the sick with herbs who was convicted as a witch and survived Virginia's only trial by ducking in the Lynnhaven River. Her name was cleared by the governor 300 years later. I actually got these photos from a blog that goes into extreme detail on the folklore of Grace Sherwood, so you might enjoy reading that. But this person is arguing that there are no records that confirm that Grace Sherwood was ever actually convicted as a witch, but they said we do know that she was accused of being a witch and was ducked in the river. And that's the thing where they test to see whether you're a witch based on whether you float or not. But in Virginia, they did not allow the accused witch to actually drown. They just were seeing, are they able to swim? Are they not able to swim? But then they rescued them. They didn't allow them to drown, which is very different than how ducking was used in the European trials, where you did drown, and that's how they knew you weren't a witch. And if you were able to save yourself from drowning, then you were a witch and executed. It is in memory of her, so it is a memorial, even if she wasn't killed for the accusation of witchcraft. So that's an interesting one that I found. And then the other one I found is from Ireland. And this statue portrays Dame Alice
Keitler. Dame Alice Keitler. Dame Alice Keitler.
Dame Alice Keitler.
Keitler. Dame Alice Keitler and her maid Petronella. Alice was accused of being a witch. Again, this article has like a lot of the history and folklore, so I won't go into all of it. You can read it yourself if you want to. But essentially, Alice was accused but ended up fleeing. And then other people in her life continued to be questioned, such as her maid, Petronella, who did end up burned. This statue represents them. This photo I love because the statue is on one side of a road. On the other side of a road is a field where a bunch of sheep are grazing. But the statue itself, from the angle that we're seeing it, we can see the two women. I'm not even sure which is which, and from this angle it's hard to see all the details, but it looks like one of them is holding onto a baby or something, and she's kind of facing up, and then the other is kneeling down next to her, it almost looks like, coming out of a stump of wood, and she's holding a knife, and there is a fish lying in front of her. They both have long flowing hair. And yeah, I don't have another angle of this photo from this article. So it's not, like there's not a plaque with it that says like in memory of these witches or anything like that, unless it's on the other side of this statue. This is the only photo that I found. But it is a statue that is meant to memorialize the story of these accused witches in particular. So I thought I would include those couple of statues in this video as well. So I'm sure there are a lot more that I missed, right? There's no way this was going to be an extensive video. And again, I definitely found information about other witch trials that I didn't know a lot about, and maybe you don't know a lot about either, so I will probably end up doing another video about the other witch trials that I've learned about so far. But I wanted to focus on memorials and like physical representations of people memorializing the victims of these witch hunts around parts of the world. Also, this is not the entire world, obviously. And that brings me to, it's just a good opportunity to mention that witch hunts do still happen around the world. They might not be happening in the United States and Europe anymore because these anti-witchcraft laws have been repealed, but there are places around the world where witchcraft practice is still illegal, it's still punishable by law, and the Wikipedia article about witch hunts talks more about some of these. So it talks about how witch hunts still very much are a thing in places like sub-Saharan Africa, South Central Asia, and Papua New Guinea, and Saudi Arabia. A quote from that page says, "There are some countries that have legislation against the practice of sorcery. The only country where witchcraft remains legally punishable by death is Saudi Arabia." So I don't know about you, but over the past several years, I do occasionally see an article pop up about people being accused of witchcraft in some other country around the world. And even if it's not legally a crime by their government where they live, there might still be accusations and repercussions by their peers, just by people that you live around. I won't go into any details, and I'm not linking any of those articles, but I'm just remembering things that I've seen over the years. In some cases, it might be that people are discovered to be homosexual, and homosexuality is still very much demonized and connected with you're being possessed by a demon or you're under the influence of witchcraft, because that's the only way you would possibly do this thing. And so being found out to be homosexual can get you accused of witchcraft and beaten or killed. And so these are things that are in some of our history in the areas where we live, but they're also things that are still happening around the world. And if we are not already aware of that, I think it's just good to be aware of that. It's still not okay to be a witch everywhere. And of course, most of these, or all of these witch hunts that have occurred historically, and these ones that we're memorializing that I'm talking about here, these people were not even actually practicing witchcraft. They were accused of being witches because of various other things. Whereas people today, like me, maybe like you, if you're watching this, many of us are actually practicing witchcraft. So there are a lot of people who I hear in the United States talking about how they feel some sort of spiritual kinship to the Salem witches because they're a witch. I don't feel any type of specific connection to them because I know that they were not actually practicing witchcraft the way that I am actually practicing witchcraft. So I feel like there is a strong difference there. And the reason that that's important to me is that these people were killed for the mere suspicion and groundless accusation of something that many of us now are actually openly doing. I do feel a connection to this type of history because of that, because we're talking about people who were victims of something that they weren't really doing, but we are. And if we were alive then, we would have had to be much more private about it than we are today, or we would be dead. So I don't feel any sort of spiritual lineage kinship to them because, oh, they were witches and I'm also a witch, because I do not feel that any of these people in Salem, for example, I do not feel that any of those accused were actually practicing witchcraft in the way that I am practicing witchcraft today. So it's just a very different feeling. And of course, when we talk about what is witchcraft and what are these practices that they're being accused of, when we talk about like Grace Sherwood, she's described as having healed people with herbs, and that's a practice that can be associated with witchcraft. And so she might not have been doing everything else that we now think of as a practice of witchcraft today, but maybe she was doing some things that are the reason that people accused her of that. So there might be some connections. Like, yes, I work with herbs and Grace Sherwood worked with herbs, or, things like that. But it's just a very different sort of thing for me to think about. So yeah, that's just some research that I've been doing over the past week that I wanted to share with you all because my friend asked me if there are any witchcraft memorials in Europe to honor the victims of those trials, and yes, there are. And I'm sure there are even more that I didn't find yet. If you want to hear more about the other witch trials that I learned about in my research this past week, then stay tuned for another video about that. I don't think it'll be the next video on this channel. I don't think it'll be next week, but it'll be in the near future. So keep an eye out for that if you are interested. Again, there will be a link in the description of this video to a blog post where I'm going to put all of this information and try to label it so that you can easily see which one I'm referring to where, and I'll have the photos next to them as well, so hopefully that can help you out. I tried to describe the photos for you. I hope I didn't miss any as I was going through here. I hope that that helped a little bit. I am noticing now that I skipped describing how a couple of them look, so I'm gonna record that now, but I will have edited them in where they go, and it'll be great. So thank you very much for watching and or listening to this video. I will see you next time, and until then, don't forget to be awesome, blessed be, and goodbye. This is one of those videos that definitely takes way longer to research and record and edit than the final video actually ends up being. So I do want to take a moment to thank all of my Patreon sponsors who sponsor all of my videos, whether they take me 2 hours or 20 hours. I appreciate them so much. Thank you.